Do you truly believe you know the whole story of Samuel and the wives of the fallen angels? If your answer is yes, prepare yourself for a revelation that will unsettle cherished certainties. Because hidden between scripture and silence lies a chapter sealed by forces beyond ordinary memory. In this investigation, we will lift that seal, follow a trail of whispered names and shattered oaths, and stand at the crossroad where human love met celestial trespass. Stay with me until the end. The final piece will force you to rethink lineage, mercy, and the reach of divine justice. If this search for truth moves you, leave a like and subscribe so this message can reach more hearts. May the Arcangel Miguel guard your path as we descend from pulpit into valley, from the heights of heaven to the dust of human homes, where our story begins. High above the world, where light pooled like molten glass and sound became a chorus of silver, the vigilantes gathered in ordered ranks beneath vaulted blue. Semzaza adjusted his mantle, feeling the ozone tang that clung to the air like the flavor of a storm, and spoke with a voice that made the light itself tremble. Uriel tilted his head and watched distant storms move across the horizon like living maps. Azazel trailed his fingers through a current of cold wind and tasted metal on the back of his tongue. Gabriel paced, each footfall a drumbeat against the silence. Raphael stood with hands folded, smelling frankincense and brimstone mingled, and listened to a world that hummed with unseen grief. The scene smelled of rain and old ink, looked like hammered gold and shadow, sounded like distant chimes and approaching thunder, felt like a pressure against the chest and the itch of forbidden longing. Semzaza. We watch, and the world below unfolds as it will. Uriel. Watching is failing unless mercy moves. Azazel. Mercy here would unravel the order. Gabriel. Mercy has its own law, written by God. Raphael. The children of our choices call us to reckon. Semzaza. Then we choose beyond watching. Gabriel. Are you certain? Azaza. Certain enough to descend. Uriel. Certain enough to bind fate to flesh. Raphael. We speak no more in riddles. Semzaza. Come then, let this be the first step. The light thinned, colors bled into one another, and as the vigilantes made their decision, the sky tasted of copper, and the air trembled like a struck bell. The wings of glory folding into intent. Below, mountains smelled of pine and wet stone. Above, the hush was like outstretched hands pleading. At this moment, the celestial and the human inhaled the same breath. On the slopes of a mountain that remembered every footfall of creation, the covenant was spoken. The rock was warm underfoot, as if holding a secret hearth, and small insects on the grasses seemed to listen. Samuel would later read fragments of that oath in a manuscript that smelled of mildew and old skin, but that night the words were raw in the mouths that formed them. Raindrops left cold beads on eyelids, smoke rose in thin threads, and the moon leaned like a witness behind gauze clouds. Semzaza. By what right do we step between the throne and the earth? Azazel. By the right of compassion. Uriel. Compassion may be noble, but will it preserve the law? Gabriel. The law was given so creation might flourish, not so it may suffocate. Raphael. What of consequence? What of lineage? Semzaza. We will teach them secrets, give them knowledge that heals and builds. Azazel. We will take wives, we will intertwine. Uriel. This is a flame no hand can unburn. Gabriel. Then let the oath bind us to our choice. Semzaza. I swear on the ancient light to stand by our decision. Azazel. I swear on the memory of the first dawn. Raphael. I swear to carry the weight. Uriel. I swear to hold to what is right afterward." In that moment, the mountain seemed to groan, stones remembering the pressure of eons, air carrying the taste of iron, and a small bird far below made a sound like a cracked bell. Voices echoed down valleys and entered villages like an unwelcome breeze. The sick felt a shiver of hope, and the mothers an ache that was older than their children. Samuel was not a prophet by birth. He had the look of a man who had spent years bending over texts by lantern, who smelled of dust and lemon oil, who carried in his throat the careful timbre of a teacher, and the stubborn quiet of one who had lost much and chosen study as a refuge. His backstory unfolds across 3 quiet sections. As a boy, he learned to read on a knee that shook with age, listening to a grandmother who prayed aloud in a voice like gravel and honey. As a young man, he traveled to scriptoriums where monks smoked pipes and argued theology until dawn, learning to weigh a phrase like a coin. As a middle-aged scholar, he watched his village endure flood and famine and realized that stories carried survival as much as doctrine. He had been trained to look for seams in manuscripts, the places where ink matched the rhythm of breath. And in these seams he found not only errors but whispers of deliberate concealment. He would later follow a trail of marginalia, charcoal marks, and ink blots that led him to a tattered codex which, when he opened it, smelled like cedar closets and the sweat of long work. Samuel had the sound of paper under fingertips in his memory, and a hunger for truth that felt like thirst at night. He was haunted by a single question he could not silence. What had been taken from those who had loved beyond their station, and what had been hidden by the quick silence of holy men and the slow forgetfulness of time? Naamah remembered a cradle, of reed and river, the taste of barley bread, the warmth of a father who worked with stone, and a mother who sewed by the light of a whispering lamp. Her backstory is woven in the memory of 3 distinct seasons: childhood of laughter and cracked pots, the sudden entry of strangers who sang like bells and smelled of ozone, and the months after, when the sky itself seemed to bend toward her house. As a young woman, she felt an immediate shiver when the watcher spoke her name. The air around his presence tinged with rosemary and cold iron, his hands rough yet strangely gentle. She learned his language by echoing rhythm and breath, and in nights when wind pushed through reeds, she pressed her hand to the place where his skin met hers, and felt a warmth that burned like translated scripture. Later, as gossip and rumor tightened around her like a noose, she watched neighbors close their doors and priests lift their eyes away, as if her memory had become an infection. Her life split into the before and after of that choice. Before, a river of ordinary small mercies. After, a complicated inheritance of knowing and forgetting, of children who grew taller than men and left prints of heavy sleep on floors. Naamah carried inside her the taste of salt from riverbeds and the echo of celestial songs that sometimes returned at dawn like distant bells, and in her heart a tender grief that refused to be erased by decree or silence. The seduction that led to unions forbidden by heaven was less a tale of blunt force than a slow bending of will. Scenes unfolded in kitchens that smelled of yeast and hearth smoke, in tents where goat hair creaked, and in courtyards where figs dropped like dull moons. Naamah, I did not come to be taken. Semjaza, you were seen, and being seen is a call. Naamah, what promise did you hold? Promises of wisdom to ease pain. Naamah, wisdom that makes sense of loss? Azazel, wisdom that heals wounds and teaches craft. Naamah, and what of the vows we took at the well? They were vows of heart and hand. Naamah, the neighbors whispered my name like a wound. Azazel, they will whisper of miracles too. Naamah, My child grew strange and heavy. They bear the shape of both worlds. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. That tilt was never meant to be gentle. The air in these scenes tasted like simmering herbs and iron. The light filtered through cloth like a memory. The touch of hands was sometimes hot and sometimes like river stones. The sounds of children at play mixed with a low metallic hum, and the sight of a giant footprint in mud was both wonder and warning. The dialogues here expanded, each exchange punctuated by the scar of a choice, stretched into 8 or more returns until regret and longing braided into each other. The births of the Nephilims rewrote the map of village life. They arrived with cries that sounded like both man and storm, with skin that held the sheen of river stones and eyes that remembered stars. Mothers smelt both milk and metal on their infants, the air of birth rooms layered with the sweetness of saffron and the heavy scent of animal musk. A mother named Miriam would later speak of a child whose hands splintered wood without effort. Jonah, a farmer, would tell of a son who uprooted a sapling with a look. The deeds of these hybrids were both gifts and curses, a healing touch that mended bone and a hunger that tore fences. Scene dialogue. Miriam: he stood and the oxen bowed. Jonah: he moved as if understanding the language of hills. Leah: the harvest swelled and then burned. Asahel: the animals feared him and the river sang when he approached. High priest: this is not simple blessing. Dr. Klein: the bodies bear marks like old inscriptions. Professor Hale: they alter the weather with their anger. Miriam: I did not birth monsters. Jonah: we are all bound to our children. The sensory tableau included the crack of thunder in clear skies, the metallic tang of a giant breath, the sleep of the village heavy as wet cloth, the sight of footprints that girdled fields, and the touch of a child who could both soothe and break a rib with careless strength. Social orders shifted as fear and awe rolled together like storm clouds, and alliances formed as those who remembered favored the children, and those who feared sought to bind them. A decision from the divine became inevitable when the balance no longer held. In the throne hall that smelled of cedar and the faint cold of distant snow, the archangel Miguel argued for a justice measured and terrible. The scene was a study in sound and silence. The rustle of robes like wind over bone, the low thunder of wings, a voice that was at once waterfall and anvil. Gabriel and Raphael counseled for restraint and for protection. Uriel warned of contagion in spirit, and God spoke with the authority of rain falling on stone. Miguel: order must be restored. Gabriel: mercy tempers order. Raphael: redemption is possible. Uriel: the world cannot bear more fracture. God: let the measure be just and swift. Miguel: I will descend to bind and to seal. Gabriel: take counsel and bring those who can remember. Raphael: prepare the folds of mercy. Uriel: mark the gates and watch the ways. The apparatus of celestial justice smelled of iron and smoke, looked like a legion of mirrors and blades, sounded like the sharpening of 1,000 resolutions, felt like a pressure that straightened the spine of the world, and tasted like dried herbs left under a stone. Moment of tension 1. Samuel stood at the doorway of a ruin, palm on carved stone, feeling the weight of choices not his own. Memory rose like heat. He remembered a child laughing, a candle guttering, a priest turning away. Inside his throat there was a bitter salt of accusation he wanted to hurl at heaven. He could choose to expose every hidden line of the codex and unmake reputations, or to fold the pages and guard the weak. The memory was quick and merciless, and Samuel breathed in cedar and dust and decided to speak truth even if the world recoiled. The breath left him like a small confession that tasted of iron and hope. The punishments that followed were both precise and sorrowful. The wives were carried before seals and asked to forget or to bear a different memory. Star and Naamah faced different paths. Star would be set apart, her name made into a hush, and her face turned to stone in the memory of others. Naamah would be granted safety at the cost of partition from her children's remembered faces. Dialogue. High Priest: you must choose oblivion or exile. Naamah: how can forgetting be mercy? Star: if memory burns the heart, let it be cooled. Naamah: will my children know me if I accept? High Priest: they will know a mother in the shadows. Naamah: then I will choose for them. Star: may your wound be eased. Naamah: may their futures be kind. The punishments smelled of ash and rain, tasted like rust and bread, felt like fingers closing around a throat and then loosening, sounded like weeping and soft closing doors, and looked like sealed rooms and hidden alcoves where women stitched names into cloth so small only they could read them. Moment of tension 2. In the night after the decree, the Nephilims gathered under an open sky and raised voices like the groan of lost trees. Samuel listened from a distant ridge, the wind carrying the low cadence of pleading. He felt a choice press against his ribs like a fist, to intervene with the sharp blade of law, or to hold back and let divine judgment run its course. The memory of Naamah's hand in his thoughts made his fingers ache. He moved, then stopped, then moved again, torn between law and compassion. The tension burned like dry reeds. The destruction of the greater Nephilims was cataclysmic, yet partial, a thunder that cracked mountains and a silence that swallowed entire valleys. Cities smelled of smoke and iron, the sky carried falling ash like gray snow, and seas foamed with a fury that lifted ships as toys. Miguel led the charge with blades that rang like bells. Dialogue in the storm. Miguel: bring the chains forged by the throne. Gabriel: take the scrolls that name their deeds. Raphael: keep mercy in your pocket. Uriel: seal what remains with holy wax. Miguel: no mercy for those who would unmake the world. Soldier: we tremble at your command. Scholar: the seals may not hold forever. Old woman: my son was one of them. Soldier: then kill for me. The heat of conflagration on the skin, the tang of salt and blood and iron, the sight of giants collapsing like felled oaks, the sound of earth grinding, and then a long, thin cry, the touch of ash like cold flour on lips. Yet some spirits slipped through seams and wandered like lost things, and the lacquer that was set did not fit perfectly. The partial failure would echo in generations. Moment of tension 3. After the smoke cleared, Samuel opened a hidden folio with hands that shook. The pages contained records that could rewrite the memory of whole towns. A choice sat before him like a razor: publish and inflame, hide and preserve, or bring the information to courts that might misuse it. He smelled ink and old skin. His mouth tasted of iron. He thought of Naamah and the quiet of her decision. For a long beat he did nothing, then made a quiet plan that would test his faith and his courage. In the months that followed, small reprisals and quiet mercies rippled out. 1 month later, the villages were rearranging themselves around absence and presence. New rooms were built for those who bore the faint marks of celestial blood, and schools incorporated practical skills whispered by elders who remembered. Samuel had organized a study group of seekers including Professor Hale and Dr. Klein, and they measured footprints and cataloged oral histories. The weather seemed to hold its breath more often, and some nights the stars rearranged like a bruise slowly fading. 3 months later, lines of descent were clearer and more contested. Certain families claimed a heritage that opened doors to craft and closed doors to temples. Leah ran a sanctuary for women like Naamah, while Jonah worked a field that produced fruits of strange size and sweetness. The high priest wrote letters that circulated like a fever, offering both condemnation and cautious invitations to reconciliation. In certain places, doors were barred against those who might carry a spark. In others, communities embraced hybrid gifts and taught restraint. Scholars debated in low voices, and Samuel presented a paper that was careful with language, naming consequences but withholding the most incendiary fragments. 6 months on, the aftershocks had shaped new institutions. A council with representatives including Dr. Klein, Professor Hale, Eli the scribe, Miriam the midwife, and Asahel the farmer convened in a hall that smelled of wood polish and incense. They created safe rooms, binding rituals, and a registry that balanced protection and privacy. Some Nephilim descendants were apprenticed in crafts that served many, their strength used to rebuild bridges and repair wells. Others were hidden away behind sealed doors, their existence a rumor that fed both fear and speculation. Politically, small alliances had formed between villages and sympathetic clerics. Culturally, a new set of songs had entered the folk canon, songs that taught children caution about looking too closely into the sky and to honor the sorrows of mothers. Samuel kept certain folios under lock and entrusted them to Miriam and to Eli, and Naamah walked in the shade of a fig tree while children ran past, their laughter like bells that both comforted and stung. Years later, the prophecy lingered like a footnote that swelled into a chapter. Scholars and saints alike argued about the lake ray and its partial failure, about whether the wandering spirits signaled a future unsealed. The vocabulary of vigilance entered daily speech: seals, archanjo, lake ray, Sheol, lineage. Voices urged watchfulness and prayers for mercy. The memory of the wives of the fallen angels remained both a caution and a song of compassion. Samuel continued to teach, his lessons heavy with the knowledge that truth can heal and hurt in the same breath. Naamah tended a small garden and sewed names into cloth that only she and her daughters could read. The world had shifted. It would shift again. Keep watching, for history is a living thing that returns in patterns, in footprints, in the quiet hunger to know. If this account moved you, subscribe so these revelations can reach others who thirst for careful truth. Share your view below. Do you believe the wives remembered and carried grief, or that oblivion was a mercy chosen by heaven? Speak with reverence and courage. May the Arcangel Miguel guard your steps, and may the search for truth keep you both vigilant and compassionate. Remember that the past is not dead, and that the choices of a few long ago still walk among us.